session today. My name is Elma Aluge. Good morning once again and welcome everyone for joining the session. Rather, thank you for joining the session this morning. Just before I start, this is basically a webinar series that SCAF is organizing to sort of discuss the issues around sickle cell or different issues around sickle cell. And today's topic is accessing funding and grant opportunities for NGOs. I do a brief introduction of the topic and then we could just go along. So NGOs or non-governmental organizations play a major role in international development, in aid and in philanthropy. In Nigeria, most of them are non-profit by definition. So they require, they manage budgets and funds of millions or up to billions of dollars or naira, depending on their size. As such, they require a variety of sources of funding from either private donors or membership dues or contributions from agencies. So the topic came as an idea during the COVID pandemic. Now, in the sickle cell space, we had always worked with the notion that there's not a lot of funding in the sickle cell community, so we're all struggling for the same fund, basically. But during COVID, we accessed a lot more support from private institutions, banks, different organizations, and with this, we thought that, okay, if they're giving us money now, it means that we are either not approaching them for money the right way, or we're not meeting them at the right time for said funds. So this conversation is basically, okay, when is the right time to get this money? Is there a process to getting this money? And is it a sectorial matter, or is it just an issue with NGOs in general, and we're yet to hack it in the sickle cell community? So that's basically why we're having the conversation today. So I do a quick introduction of our panelists, and then we'll jump right into the first question. Also, the session is being recorded, and for attendees, if you have any questions during the session, just drop it in the Q&A box and we'll attend to it at the end of the conversation. So first of all, we have Ms. Ifeyinwa Ogochukwu. I'm actually very excited to be on this panel with you today. She joined the Tony Elumelu Foundation in 2017 as the Director of Partnerships and Evaluations, a role she held for 2 years. In this position, she developed the foundation's institutional framework for financial and value-add partnerships to scale the impact of the $100 million TEF Entrepreneurship Program Fund. She was appointed in April 2019 as the 3rd Chief Executive Officer of the Tony Elumelu Foundation, and she holds the distinct honor of being the first African to hold this position. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ma.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. I'd move quickly to Sir Bright, who is he's an in-house favorite. He's a well-loved member of SCAF's high-level advisory board. He possesses a wealth of experience in working with various donor agencies, including USAID, DFID, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, Malaria, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He led Society for Family Health Nigeria to become the first Nigerian NGO to receive direct funding from the US government, and also one of the leading health management organizations in the world, with over 3.5 million couple years of protection annually, delivering the 4th largest CYP globally. His innovative and strategic awareness campaigns are well known across the country. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and I'll move quickly and, to the last but not the least, the youngest person on our panel, aside me, of course, Mr. Isaiah Owolabi. He is young but far above his peers in impact delivery. He is the Chief Executive Officer at the Nigerian Business Coalition Against AIDS and co-founder at hayseed.org. He is a global development expert with experience in harnessing public, private, and social sector resources and competence to accelerate impact for health, education, and economic productivity interventions in Africa. He is a Queen's Young Leader, a Mandela Washington Fellow, and a Commonwealth Youth Award recipient for his excellent work in the development. Thank you, Mr. Isaiah, for joining us today. Isaiah, please just say hello so that we know that you're in the room with us. Okay, I think that there might be a glitch, but I think we can move on. So for the first, for an introduction rather, I would ask a question, and I hope that all the panelists can answer, from you, Ms. Ifeanyiwa, to Mr. Bright, to Isaiah. So the question is, what would you say has been your NGO's experience accessing funding over the last 5 years? Now, I know that you're all in different spaces, doing different things. So how has the experience been, as far as accessing funding is concerned?
Thank you, Elma. And like I said, it's a pleasure to be here, and well done to the organizers for putting this together. Primarily because the NGO sector has evolved tremendously in the last decade. And we found that it plays a critical role in international development, which is important for emerging economies across Africa, particularly Nigeria. NGOs have proved pivotal in terms of policy shaping and in terms of the socioeconomic welfare of the populace. So what we do at the Tony Elumelu Foundation, as you all know, is entrepreneurship empowerment. So we are laser focused on empowering African entrepreneurs, because we believe that entrepreneurship is one of the ways to accelerate and catalyze economic development, because poverty contributes almost 90% to the problems of Africa. But that doesn't mean that the work of, we are focused on entrepreneurship. The Sickle Cell Aid Foundation is focused on, eradicating sickle cell and giving support to people who are suffering from sickle cell. So one would think, from the naked eye, that, oh my goodness, we are two polar opposites. What could we possibly have in common? But actually, health is wealth. And so we know that it's when you lose your health that you realize how critical it is. And so the work that we all do in the space is as important to ensure that Africa takes its rightful place on the global stage as a developed economy, an economy that has shared prosperity for all its citizens, and that all citizens have equal rights to the dignity of life, health, education, and decent work. And so for us, in terms of accessing funding, what we found is that there has to be a new narrative. There has to be a new way of doing things. Gone are the days of aid. Gone are the days where NGOs and not-for-profits position themselves as charity organizations, depending on handouts and the goodwill of others. I think the most important element is that NGOs should understand that the only difference between an NGO and a business that is for profit is that we do not make profit at the end of the year. We do not share dividends at the end of the year, right? But in terms of the way the organization is run, it must run like a proper organization that is value-driven and a going concern, not dependency-driven and charity-focused. And I think that is the one critical factor in being able to access funding and generate interest from donors in different sectors. So what are the two elements that are important for this? First and foremost, you must be able to demonstrate value. You must be able to demonstrate impact. And then also, you have to show that you have invested considerably into your own cause. Showing that you have spent the time is not enough, because how can we expect others to invest in our cause if we have not invested in our cause, no matter how little? So once we're able to show value and impact and show that we have skin in the game, you find that conversation takes on a completely different perspective when engaging potential donors. So I think that just to open up the conversation is how can we in the NGO sector get NGOs to understand that you must move away from a charity mentality, what can you do for me mentality, to what can I do for you? How can I help you achieve your corporate social responsibility goals? How can I help you bring value to your community, to your environment? Because that is what organizations are looking for. And both public and private sector has evolved in the last 10 years to understand that it cannot just be about the bottom line. It cannot just be about profit. You have to do well while doing good. So everyone has a vested interest in giving back to the community and having many levels of engagement in terms of corporate social responsibility. And we now have to look at how NGOs can connect through shared value, shared principles to give organizations what they're looking for, and in exchange, receive the funding that they need to carry on activities.
Lovely. I've gotten so many things and we're just into the first 3 minutes. So you're saying that value add is important. You have to be value driven. You have to be impact driven as well. And you need to move from the mentality of being a charity to more of a what can I do for you approach when you're approaching funders. Okay, that's a solid way to put it. Mr. Bright, do you have any contributions?
Right. Thank you very much, Ifeanyi, for that very strong foundation. I can agree more that the NGO sector is now clearly defined as the third sector, which is when you talk about the private sector, the public sector, and now the NGO sector that have demonstrated to be a sector on its own. Of course, we do know that the NGO sector takes quite a lot from the private sector in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, and that is why many of them are still out there and thriving. We do know, however, that for any NGO to really succeed, you have to work very closely with the government, because it can only be taken from the strategy of the government to improve on what the government sets out to achieve. You can hardly start anything of your own. So that in itself has its own advantages and disadvantages. The major advantages are more have to be supported by the government, backed by the government, but sometimes you find out there are some divergence in terms of ways things are done between the government and the NGO. But having said that, we will continue to work together with the government. Of course, we know also that very recently the government has stepped up its regulation of the NGO sector as well, which is evolving. And we do hope it wouldn't get to a dangerous situation where the NGO sector will begin to lose its effectiveness and its focus. Now, like anyone said, I think over the NGO sector has seriously evolved. I've been in the NGO
Is Sir Bright having some connectivity issues? I want to make sure it's just not on my
for over 30 years. How much change? Hello?
Okay, yes.
Hello?
Back on. Yes, go on, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. You broke up for a bit.
Oh, okay, good. All right. So I was actually saying that there has been a lot of evolution in the NGO sector over the last several years. Things have changed very rapidly. It is no longer a situation where an NGO sits down and the donors look for you. The space is now very competitive and you have to compete very effectively. So what do you need to do for you to be able to access some funds from the donors? The very first one is that you have to demonstrate value for money, which Ifeanyi has already talked about. And value for money has quite a number of elements. One of them is impact. You have to demonstrate impact. You have to demonstrate accountability. You have to show impact, and impact is not just about writing it out. It has to be data-driven. So more recently, data has been very emphasized in the NGO. Many NGOs now publish in international journals that are that somebody can actually vouch to. So it's no longer about, this is what I have done. You have to demonstrate it, and others have to support. There's also issues around sustainability. We know that no donor is here to stay forever. So more often than not, NGOs are expected to demonstrate sustainability from day one. In fact, we call it exit strategy, which you even have to build into your proposal. And then now that I am in a completely different arena from where I used to be in the area where you have HIV, malaria, and family planning. In the area where I am now, which is working in neglected tropical diseases, one element that seems to be playing out very recently is the fact that you have to have a timeline for elimination of the disease you're talking about. So for some diseases like trachoma, things like lymphatic filariasis, and so on and so forth, the donors are expecting that we have to have a timeline where we say we have done so much in this area. We are driving towards the elimination so that the government the donor doesn't have to continue to put in money into the same disease area year after year. So how can we demonstrate that? That can only be done if there is effective planning, evidence of impact, and then we can now say this is a timeline, this is where we are aiming to be in X year. So that the government or the donor will actually be saying, okay, by this year, I would have achieved this milestone, and then I'll be looking forward to, so where next? So let me just use these as some of the introductory comments as we go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just reiterating the points that you've made, just like Ms. Ifeanyiwa had said, you need to demonstrate the value for money to your donors or your intending donors. So what impact are you making? Is it data-driven? Is your NGO accountable? Can you be held accountable internally and externally as well? Do you have an exit strategy or a sustainability plan? Because that's important for donors. And then for some NGOs that work with diseases, you would be looking at a timeline for disease elimination. Now, I'm wondering how that translates to those of us in the sickle cell space, and I'm guessing that's a question that you can answer subsequently. So thank you for raising those points. Over to you, Isaiah.
Thank you very much for having me. And I think that the first two speakers have done very good justice to the conversation. But I would also want to add my piece in the next 2 to 3 minutes. And in my 13 years of working in the nonprofit sector, I would say both being on the receiving end, I mean, looking after donors from the private sector, from donor agency, multilateral organizations, and also being in positions where I'm actually reviewing what nonprofit and social enterprise across board are pushing out, when they are pushing out for raising funds and in the position of approving. I would say one key thing is very important, which is making sure that processes are institutionalized. And also, what I also believe is very important is to make sure that regulatory requirements are met. That's very key. Over the last, I would say, 13 to 15 years of my nonprofit experience, I would say, what I have always noticed is that we somehow have more non-governmental individuals than non-governmental organizations. What it means is that we have many institutions that are built around a single person than building around creating systems. And, you know, institutions, nonprofits, and social enterprises alike need to first understand that beyond the level of having the passion or the interest or the evidence to even create impact, it's important to create the foundation that first can sustain the impact, and also secondly is conducive to actually accept funding or receive or process funding. I think this is a very critical thing that nonprofit and social enterprises need to be aware of. Also, as Mr. Bright pointed out, the relationship with donor or private sector has evolved over the years. And specifically, what I also mentioned, which are related to value, it's important to think about this evolution of this relationship. And we need to think about the fact that what is the win-win here for the private sector that is dropping the funds or the donor agency that is dropping the funds? And how can we, for example, leverage on technology and data science tools to be able to accelerate the impact of development? When we are keen into some of these opportunities, it will be easier for non-profit organizations, for example, with my experience, to receive funding and also to sustain the interest of the non-profit, of the donor agency or the private sector organization. Lastly, I think it's important that non-profit organizations evolve from a position of thinking that they have a solution to the problem to a position where they are co-creating solutions, both with the community and their donors, so that the potential donor, either from private sector and multilateral agency, which might be challenging in this case to do that. But I think if non-profits find a platform to do this, the chances are higher that they will attract funding and that they will sustain the funding for a long time.
Lovely. So just to try and break that down again for there are a lot of technical terms being used. NGOs just need to evolve from a space where they think that they're creating solution as independents to co-creating with communities, co-creating with donor bodies, and that sort of expands their makes them more competitive, rather, in the space. Thank you very much for that. I'd like to follow up with you, Isaiah. So I know that HIV, you're in the HIV, support space. I know HIV has gotten a lot of funding globally, and in Nigeria, we've gotten a lot of international fund. There are long-term projects and long-term funds available for HIV in Nigeria. I feel like, is this something that has happened because of government involvement, or is it because of the organizations that support HIV, or is it, however it has come to be, how can the sickle cell community sort of replicate this kind of funding access?
Well, I would say that it's both because of government and because of the nonprofit community. But beyond that, is for us to also think about the economic burden of diseases and what is the cost of malaria or HIV or tuberculosis, for example, compared to other disease. And we need, Mr. Bright talked a lot about the role of data. So we need to, for example, the sickle cell community needs to, for example, show what the economic burden of sickle cell is. So when people talk about malaria, for example, and when the conversation is being discussed within the private sector, so the conversation is usually around the fact that in 1 year, malaria gobs over $12 billion from the economy. For example, over the last 20 years, the HIV pandemic, or epidemic as we might call it, has gobbled over $500 billion from the global economy, according to statistics. So we can see what the economic burden of this disease looks like. So if the sickle cell community needs to bring forth an argument for investment in sickle cell, I think it's important to leverage on data so that we understand very well the cost and consequence of sickle cell, both for businesses, for the community, and even for the economy at large. That would help, for example, private sector donors to be more interested. Secondly, it might also help the government to focus more in terms of strategic response for health in the country. So for many of these diseases, the government actually has a response to it now, but how do they prioritize one issue over the other? So we need to investigate what these processes look like, and that would also strengthen our advocacy across a board, both from the individual to the institution, community, and then to the policy level. And even when you talk about advocacy to businesses or donors, from the lowest level to the highest level of governance among the donor community, both from private donors and multilateral agencies. So I think that the sickle cell community just needs to reorganize and leverage more on data and relationships more to be able to bring this to the front burner, but not bringing it to the front burner because it's an emotional issue. Yes, it is. Because it's an health issue. Yes, it is. But it's also an economic and a development challenge. And how do we show that? We show that through research and proper evidence.
Lovely, lovely. I like the way you put it. We need to translate our emotions into data and our data into a document that shows what the economic burden actually is in Nigeria. And I like that you mentioned that, because my next question is to Sir Bright. So the question is, seeing as we need to do, we need to do this document that shows what the burden and all of that is, how can we do that in a way where we are still accessing funding to run the projects that create data? Because we can't separate the two elements of it. So how do you think we can put out, be running our projects to get data and are still accessing fund at the same time?
Thank you very much, Isaiah and Elma. I think, Isaiah, you touched on quite a number of things. Elma, just to let you know that there's a beginning to everything in life. There has never been anything that started at the top. We're talking about HIV. It started someday. And so it's a matter of strategy and a matter of planning. There are different elements of programming. And one could actually start from data gathering and operational research. Operational research is very important. So I think you can only demonstrate evidence based on what is happening. You don't have to demonstrate evidence only through programming. So as you know, some people even do a lot of literature research, and based on literature review, you are even able to present some data. But I think there is no need to concentrate on areas of data gathering and operational research to fully understand the economic impact, like Isaiah put it, sickle cell as a disease. Now with that, you can begin to convince the international community. Just to be very blunt and probably to put it in perspective, there is usually international support for any disease before it goes anywhere. That comes with some kind of hype, lack of the appropriate word, and then overt interest. As you know, you have three different major donors that if they take interest in any disease area, it sells. The bilateral donors, the multilateral donors, and the major foundations, of which Bill and Melinda Gates is one of them. If you can get any of these three major donors to back your data and your research and to hype it, again, for lack of the appropriate word, you are very likely to get international recognition. So yes, what I'm saying is that you need to start with operational research, gather some data, use that for advocacy, buy the support of these major donors. I guarantee you that the next will be funding now coming in to say, we've heard about this, we've seen data on it, we need to intervene and begin to see impact, and then we're going to. Let me just quickly use this opportunity to talk about one or two things that I also alluded to, which Elma talked about, you were going to ask me, and that is, for diseases like sickle cell that doesn't appear as if it's ever going to go away. What do we do? I think Isaiah did mention something, which is co-creation. I'll probably use another word, which is innovative programming. You need to demonstrate that you understand the disease area you're talking about better than the donor. And the only way to do that is to continue to co-create, continue to be innovative, continue to show that you can do more with less. So these are very, very important. Now, as I also talked about the issues around the non-governmental individuals, which I know is very prevalent in Nigeria and is very unfortunate. This is again where we need to do a lot before we access funds from the donors. We need to demonstrate that we are not working for the market. We are actually working for the public. There are, again, with all due respect, I used to tell people, and I still say that SFH is one of the NGOs I know in Nigeria that does not belong to anybody. The founding members of SFH never benefited anything from SFH. Biko Ransom Kuti, the Ife Iwanziakos, and the Malam Walid, none of their relations worked in SFH, none of them worked in SFH, they never benefited anything, they just showed interest, got it working, and stepped out. I'll dive straight into myself. I worked in SFH for 26 years. 2015, I came to the board as the managing director and said, I've been managing director of this organization for 10 years, and I think corporate governance requires that I step out now. It was a big hassle, it was an issue. It took me 3 years of continuing pressure before the board eventually allowed me to leave. And I did that to demonstrate that the NGO does not belong to me because I was getting synonymous with SFH. Now it's a national NGO, it belongs to nobody, it's just there to work. So people can actually look at SFH and question what is happening there without fear of favor. So these are some of the things I need to chip in while we go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. My next question was for Ifeanyi, but I'm seeing that she's trying to log back in. Combs, please, could you help with that? While I just follow up with that question. So we're saying that we want to be able to basically focus on programming and co-creation because the disease space that we're working in is one that doesn't necessarily have a timeline. So we have to be strategic about how we put out our information, how we structure our data, and how we approach these donors. There's specific people that we need to reach out to create buzz around the disease to be able to access some funding. Okay, with that understanding, right now, with sickle cell, we're currently looking at online funding, crowdfunding, and that I guess it's a new way of funding. It's an easy way to access a pool of money, but I feel like for NGOs that are trying to transition from these independent funds to more structured program funds, right? How do we make that transition? And are there like specific documents or specific steps that we need to take aside the data gathering that you've mentioned? Are there specific steps you need to take? Isaiah, can you answer that question, please?
Isaiah, you want to give it a go?
Okay. Yeah, sure. I will. I don't think there is a yes or no for this. What I believe, like I mentioned earlier, is if you talk about documents, I think all organizations should have the required document in terms of policies for the areas that they work, and also financial management, also, which is very important for transparency and accountability, and something that gives the donor or the partner confidence to work with the organization. But also what is important is, as much as you said, we have talked about data, it's also important to learn from what works and what doesn't work. So as much as a lot of people are trying to raise funds from online community, and if you look at North America, US, Canada, and some of these countries, you look at the percentage of funding from this platform, you see that it might be up to 17 to 20% of the funding. But if you come back to Sub-Saharan Africa, and then you streamline to West Africa, and then you zero down to Nigeria, and then you look at the percentage of funding that comes from this sector, you might be going in the region of 0.00 something. I don't know the number of zeros that you get to before you get to 1. But what I'm saying is, what does that say? It doesn't say stop it, but it advises you on where you concentrate your efforts in terms of fundraising and the strategy that you use, because fundraising is a strategic activity. What that means is you have to consider a lot of things before you decide on the final approach that you would use or you want to leverage on. So I would leave it at that, and I believe Mr. Bright might be able to provide more insight into what it should be, especially maybe for a sickle cell organization in Nigeria right now.
Okay, Mr. Bright, do you want to have a go at the question?
Yeah, let me just chip in from where Isaiah stopped. I think he said it all, but one thing I think we need to look at Sickle Cell Foundation is these days, quite a number of programs are going into what I would call integrated programming. It's no longer siloed. Silo programming is no longer in vogue. As a matter of fact, it doesn't interest many donors anymore. A donor will want to put out some money and want to get quite a lot of mileage and leverage from that fund. So the question then becomes, are there ways we can integrate our sickle cell programming with other disease areas, other health, public health programming areas? That's a question we can all look into. Like I said, it's always better to join a consortium in an integrated manner so that a component of what you are doing becomes an element of the total impact that the donor fund would generate. I'll give you an example. Where I work now, our major focus is on neglected tropical diseases. But we've discovered that there are quite a number of things you can bring into that programming that would also impact the lives of the people. An example is water hygiene and sanitation, which in some ways related to some neglected tropical diseases like trachoma, but it also impacts on the livelihood of the people in some way. We have also introduced livelihood. So you find out that you have an enriched portfolio within one program where one element is leveraging on the other and building on the other, and then at the end of the day, building a stronger community. So while I wouldn't define it clearly, I think we should look at possibility of integrated programming and joining consortia. Thank you.
Okay, I'm happy that you've mentioned integrated programming and the consortium approach, because my next question is for Ms. Ifeanyiwa. I know that TEF is currently using that approach. So I want to know, how has that sort of helped with accessing funding, and what role does network or partnership play in this strategic method that has been mentioned?
Thank you, Elma, and apologies to everyone for the slight break in transmission. I was disconnected. I had to log back in. You know, this is an area that I've always been a proponent for, that in this sector, in the NGO sector, there is no such thing as competition. There's only collaboration. So we need to be thinking collaboration, synergy, partnerships. And I love what Sir Bright said, that it can no longer be about silos programming, and the foundation is a classic example. A lot of the partnerships that we have, first of all, we don't see our engagements as a donor-donee engagement. That's number one. We do not define it like that. That's not the nomenclature that we use. We always see our engagements as partnerships, because it has to be value driven and both parties have to get value from it. And so we need to begin to move away from that nomenclature of donors and donee. And partnerships has been a strong way in which we have scaled the program that we're doing. So our program started off with a $100 million commitment from our founder, from his family wealth, to identify, train, mentor, and fund 10,000 African entrepreneurs over 10 years. Within the first year, we realized that as large as that sounded, it was just barely scratching the surface. So that meant we would be selecting 1,000 entrepreneurs every year who would get $5 million from the foundation, which is $5,000 per entrepreneur. But in any given year, we have hundreds of thousands that apply. So if you select 1,000, that is barely scratching the surface. And that was why I joined the foundation as a director of partnerships, to really forge partnerships around scaling the work that we do. And of course, we began to put entrepreneurship on the global agenda. So it is critical that it's a multi-pronged approach. We have advocacy is critical. We need to ensure that we are shaping policy and creating a narrative around the work that we're doing. So, as I was preparing for this webinar, I thought about it and I said, of course, sickle cell affects mainly Black people. And unfortunately, there's been an imbalance in terms of the funding available for sickle cell compared to other things like cystic fibrosis, cancer, HIV. And Sir Bright just mentioned now that he is focused specifically on neglected tropical diseases. So the fact that it's even called that shows us that the sector already has a unique problem. But approaching it through partnerships and collaborations is killing many birds with one stone. It has to be all about innovation and disrupting the way things have been done in the past. So beyond partnerships to generate financing, let's think about it. Most of the leading scientists across the globe are of Africa. For instance, the Pfizer trials for the COVID vaccine in the United States is a Nigerian-born Dr. Onyema Obuna. And so how can we leverage the strong medical representation that Africa has across the globe to put sickle cell as well as other neglected tropical diseases on the forefront? So there are many ways to bell a cat. And so what we believe strongly is that collaboration, synergy, partnerships is certainly the way to go. It cannot be a question of going alone. If you want to go for us. Just to give an example, we have a 20 million euro partnership for organizations. It's the European Union, the Organization of African and Caribbean Pacific Nations, GIZ, which is the German Development Organization, as well as the Tony Elumelu Foundation. As long as you have the same values, the same goals, you create solutions to bring about the results that we're looking for in any given sector. So certainly NGOs need to begin to come together, co-create solutions and leverage each other's strengths in order to create a consortium that will be able to raise the fund to make impact. At the end of the day, let's always remember it's all about value and impact. And the more we work together, the more value and impact we can demonstrate.
Okay, thank you very much. That's I like that sort of expands on Mr. Bright's points and gives us like clear examples of cases where it has worked. I move to Isaiah really quickly. How do I ask this question now? Okay, so we know that these organizations, especially the international ones, have funding cycles, right? How can organizations structure their funding portfolio or their fund request around funding cycles of different organizations? Like, is there a way you could break it down for us a little bit, just so that those of us that haven't necessarily studied these things can have a better understanding? Because we've already said there's a passion, there's emotion, but then the technical know-how might be lacking a little bit in our sector. So maybe if you could shed some light on that, it could help us moving forward. Isaiah, you need to unmute yourself. You're still muted.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. I was speaking already. I was saying that one of the approach to fundraising is looking into these funding cycles. But depending on the level that your organization is and the capacity that your organization have, definitely will determine the type of funding that you can have access to. So one thing I can confidently say is that for every time during the year, there's an organization, there's a donor looking for non-profits to fund. And this is dependent on the networks and the platform that you belong to. While Mr. Bright was speaking earlier, he talked about forming consortiums. And I think for some of the biggest grants, over $1 million USD that I have had access to in the past, I would say that this happened through consortiums. And we cannot underestimate the role of consortium, especially when the organizations on board have their different strategic roles. So what it means is that before you form a consortium, you should look for the unique value that each organization brings to the table. The next thing is think about the networks and the relationships that you have. For example, if you are thinking of leveraging technology and existing online platforms, I think DevX, Funds for NGOs, Premium, the paid version, is a very good place to start from. They usually have resources from day to day, month to month, week to week, and they also have tools to remind organizations. The other thing is to plan towards these fundraising cycles. So, for example, Tony Elumelu Foundation would normally have funding at a particular time during the year when they expect entrepreneurs to apply. It is not okay to start planning for such fundraising cycle 2 weeks or a day or 3 days to such cycle. It might be important to start planning for it a long time. And I'm just going to give a typical example of some integrated programming that we can think about. So is it possible, for example, for the sickle cell community to think of ways that the Tony Elumelu Foundation can, for example, fund entrepreneurs within this space and have a justification for it? Why? Is it because they would normally not have access to funding because of their status or because of their exposure or because of the discrimination against members of the community? And how can this community then organize to engage before the funding cycle? Because donor agencies also have strategic focus. What that means is that for a long time, I'm sure, long time ago, the Tony Elumelu Foundation would have planned what they are here. How do coalitions or consortium advocate to probably find themselves within this strategic plan to make sure that donor agencies are thinking about them or they are planning very well towards funding cycles, the ways they're going to approach it? The other thing is that organizations, especially at development phase, need to understand that they do not necessarily have to have all the skills, but they can somehow find ways to make sure that they recruit either an individual or another organization that have the skill. Fundraising requires pitching that is correct and excellent. What it means is that the minimum quality that you are churning out should be excellent. And if you are going to do that, you need someone that has the skill to even communicate your need. Many times organizations are doing fantastically well. The project ideas that they have is great. But when it comes to writing or documenting it, it's a challenge. So this organization also need to learn how to recruit the best hands or the best organizations that can then position them for this funding. I will leave it at this for now.
Lovely. So what I'm getting from this conversation, and that's very interesting for me, is the need to collaborate, but collaborate strategically to access funding, if you don't want to do the, my organization is raising funds here and there, to access larger funds, you need to work together, and not just with people in your sector specifically, people outside of your sector that have the same goals as you. So in a way, you need to be able to reflect your ideas or your goals to be able to tie into other organization goals for you all to be able to access fund, collectively towards the same goal, which is what Mr. Bright had mentioned earlier when he said it has to go in, there's like a step for everything, and somehow it all needs to tie together. So I would ask my last question to Sir Bright, because I know he has to leave us by 12 o'clock. Now, you mentioned something
Emma, can I jump in a little bit?
Of course, go ahead.
I'd like to jump in a little bit and respond to a few of the comments that Isaiah made, because he called on the foundation. Isaiah, I think you're spot on. Everything
he did do that. Yes.
There's a formula. There's a formula to everything. And NGOs need to simply focus on cracking the code. So if you take SMEs, for instance, the reason why SMEs are not able to attract bank loans, which is necessary to grow a business as much as the bigger organizations can, is that they do not understand the system, they don't understand the formula, and they're not able to crack the code. If they spend enough time researching what are the requirements, what are the criteria, what do I need to put in place before I apply, you will find that there'll be a lot more success than there is. And so the same goes for NGOs. Like you rightly pointed out, every donor has its cycle, it has its parameters, it has its investment criteria, its impact criteria. And once it sees an organization that meets all these criteria, in fact, I know in the development finance institutions and world, there's much more funding than we have projects available. And that is the truth. And that is simply because the projects or the organizations are not packaging themselves the way they should in order to access this funding. And so it is critical that NGOs begin to spend more time understanding the system, understanding the criteria, and making sure that they meet the criteria. And so a lot of the collaboration can happen at that level. So for instance, you've cycle and the fact that our application's open, if any entrepreneur is applying in July, or applying or getting to it 1 week before, of course, they will not have the success that people who started way ahead of time had. And so we at the foundation believe that supporting every ecosystem is critical. So we do support social enterprises. We don't have a rule against supporting NGOs. We have had a few NGOs apply, like we have entrepreneurs who have come up with COVID-19 test kits in Ghana and other parts of Africa. Entrepreneurs who are actually working on areas that are not profit oriented. So it's all about coming together, understanding the system, understanding the code, and working to crack that code. Once you crack the code, once you understand the formula and apply along, in alignment with an organization's criteria and timelines, there'll be a lot more success than we're seeing today. So thank you for that point, Isaiah.
Thank you. I don't even need to summarize that. I feel like that was a brilliant summary already. Thank you so much. So Bright, just before you leave, I know you have to leave us by 12 o'clock. I just wanted to ask you a question, because you had mentioned, the area of the role government needs to play for a certain sector to have funding, So I know that in Nigeria right now, there's been a bill that has been, in conversation since 2015. It's barely made any headway per se. The state of sickle cell in Nigeria, it should be a priority for Nigeria, for the Nigerian government, but unfortunately it is not. And although organizations are trying to push for it to be, we aren't there yet. Now, the question is it possible to bypass the government or the priority of government in the situation to still access fund? Because in the community, there's been a conversation that, well, until the government puts their 10 fingers into it, we can't get funding in the sector. So do you think it's possible to bypass the government in, based on the consortium approach and what we've been discussing today, to get the funding that we need?
Thank you, Elma. I think the answer is yes, yes, yes. The only time you need the government is when you are required to do government counterpart contribution before you access funds. Otherwise, yes, you are absolutely free to bypass the government, get your funding, so long as you have the requisite registration to do what work you're doing with a donor. The government is not going to stop you. So just before I leave, I think I want to say a few words on what has been said by both Ifeyinwa and Isaiah, some kind of summary from my part. We talked about you need to start forming strategic alliances with already existing bigger NGOs out there. More often than not, some of the NGOs you would go to for strategic alliances might even be the ones that will be telling you, oh, what you're doing has quite a lot of alliances with what we're doing. How don't we package it this way? So that's very important. I think the next thing is that you need to know your donors. Again, both Ifeyinwa and Isaiah alluded very strongly to that. Every single donor has a strategic document that you need to look at, know where their focus is, their rules and regulations are, their funding cycle, what they cannot fund and what they can fund, and what they may fund. There are some NGOs, there are some donors that don't have rigid rules about what they can fund and what they cannot fund. The third one I want to put out there is that there are quite a number of donors out there, many of them. We need to fish some of them out, many that you may even not have heard about. As you go into some of these alliances, many of them will begin to tell you about some foundations that are out there that are not even in Nigeria, but are interested in coming into Nigeria, but may not know how to come in. There's a group called CIF, CIFF, which I'm sure many of you know about. You have Comic Relief. They're all based in the UK, and they have quite some money to give out there. The other area you might need to put your spotlight on is even the embassies and high commissions. Quite a few of them have some money, may not be that huge. And those monies are more often than not devoted to unsolicited proposals. They have limits. They may not be more than $10,000. But like I said, if you begin to bring those monies together, you get to a level where people will begin to know what you're doing. The fourth and final thing I will think about is that we as people working in the NGO sector need to find a way to change the mindset of our people. A lot of NGOs in the international community are getting their funding through what we call individual giving. CBN, where I work now, makes about 75% of their fund through individual giving through a method they call direct mailing. You have people who are ready to give $5, $2, $10, and by the time they aggregate that over a year, they make a huge sum of money. But one thing they continue to emphasize to these individual donors is that we will get back to you what we have used their money for. And that is done in a very simple way now, online, where people can assess what you're doing and see how much your money has done. This is an area I think we need to continue to explore in Nigeria. I would like to stop at this point and wish I could continue, but unfortunately I have to join the 12 o'clock meeting. So thank you very much, Isaiah. Thank you very much, Ifeyinwa, and thank you, Elma. And I hope we get to meet again sometime, somewhere.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for joining us today. We've really learned so much from you.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
Okay, so we're just going to jump into the Q&A. Luckily, I have two questions for Ms. Ifeyinwa and for Isaiah. So quickly, I'll just ask Ifeyinwa her question because I see she needs to leave as well. A lot of NGOs are considering creating profit-making arms as part of the push for sustainability. Is this something you advise, or would you suggest that they stick to donations?
it's a really good question. And that's why there's a hybrid called a social enterprise. So a social enterprise is doing the work of an NGO in terms of bringing value to communities and the environment, but also it takes profit in order to be sustainable. Now, you would not be able to combine the two in one entity because the laws governing both are very different. So you would, if you have already registered an NGO, you have, so a social enterprise would have to be registered as a corporation on its own, not an NGO, but it is absolutely advisable that for sustainability, that organizations in this space look to social enterprise more so than NGO, because being an NGO, you are 100% dependent on donor funds. But as a social enterprise, you're able to utilize these donor funds to create income generating activities that can then continue to fund your cause or the impact that you're having in your desired area. So it's absolutely something that every NGO should think about. There is already a growing sector called social enterprise. It's recognized, and in many areas it is treated as an NGO. As it doesn't mean that as a social enterprise you are only dependent on funds you make. As a social enterprise, you can receive donor funds as well, but you're allowed to invest it to generate income for sustainability.
That's okay. So thank you so much for answering that question. You're saying that you should consider the process of registering rather as a social enterprise where they can operate as a hybrid, accessing donor funds and using said donor funds to sort of create structures that can generate profit and still serve the purpose of the NGO. So that's fantastic response to the question. I see that you need to leave us now as well. It would just be I and Isaiah. Luckily, we have just one question for Isaiah, so please don't leave us. Thank you so much, Ma, for joining us today. I believe that the session has been as impactful for everyone as well as myself. So have a lovely day, Ma. Thank you so much for joining us. Isaiah, the last question for you.
Thanks, Isaiah.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Okay, so Isaiah, the last question for you is, have you found that you have to adapt your programs to what your donors are interested in? For example, there's an interest in livelihoods now, so you can create a program on that. Doesn't that take you away from your core goals? How do you manage that?
Well, I think there are two parts to the question. One is changing the organization mandate. The other part is talking about integration. So I would address the role of integration and then the role of changing the organization mandate just to tap into funding. I do not think that any organizations should change their mandate in order to access funds because that limits the essence of the existence of that organization. However, as I have said earlier, and Mr. Bright also mentioned, it's important to note that solo type of implementation is not even sustainable. However, integrated forms of implementation are quite very sustainable. Let me give you an example. So a technology program and a sexual and reproductive health program, they look like they are far apart in terms of implementation and purpose. But how do we collaborate with a technology-based organization to support female sex workers to acquire technology skills that can then make them to have access to income, probably change their mind about the current activities that they are doing, or even give them the power of choice? Because many times when people do not have access to income, it can affect their choice about their health. So if these people, especially the people at the lowest level of the pyramid, have access to income, either through technology, media, or any other way, vocational skills, they may be able to make better choices related to their health. So what does this mean? We are merging technology, economic empowerment, and a sexual and reproductive health program. That's integration. However, We cannot set out to change our mandate from, example, being an economic empowerment organization to a human rights organization solely because of fund. That is changing your organization's mandate. However, you could still work with human rights advocates to advocate for the right of certain entrepreneurs within your community who you think are being discriminated upon, or they do not have access to certain tools or services because of their tribe, their political affiliation, or any other reason. That's still integration. But you cannot absolutely erase your mandate as an organization, or you should. It's an advice. It doesn't show that you have an understanding of why you exist when you do that. However, a sickle cell organization, for example, can collaborate with a technology-focused organization or even a human rights organization to actually co-apply for a funding that will still allow them to implement the sickle cell component, and then the human rights organization still implement the human rights component to achieve a single purpose of probably improving the rights and health of people living with sickle cell. So that's integration, I think.
I wish that we could stay for another 1 hour because clearly there's still a lot for us to learn, but thank you for answering that question the way you have. We're coming towards the end of the session, so I'll just do a quick recap on all the things that have been talked about in case some people came late or they missed some parts of the session. So the first thing that was mentioned at the session was the need to collaborate as opposed to working individually or having an individualistic approach, because you're not working for yourself, you're working for the people. And it's important to pull in all of your resources and your ideas to collaborate effectively. And collaboration entails strategic alliances. You don't need every single organization to be at the table. You need to be able to highlight expertise and where organizations can come in and feed into your strategic plan. And that is important in any collaboration. But as an NGO that needs to access funds, you need to demonstrate value for money. And your value for money can touch on impact that is data-driven, accountability of the NGO, sustainability, having an exit strategy, as well as a timeline for your disease elimination. That is, if you're working in a sector that specifically needs that. You need to know what the requirements are, the institutional requirements for your space, and how you can get your documentation together, because you're of no use to any gathering or any collaboration if you are lagging in documentation. And also co-creating as opposed to co-creating with communities and donor bodies, as opposed to creating solutions independently that do not necessarily cater to the people that you're trying to serve. All ideas are great, but if they aren't targeting the specifics or the people that need them, they are technically useless. And if you're talking strategic planning, data gathering is important. Having your data at the tip of your thumb, the understanding the economic burden of the disease that you're trying to gain funds for is also important, but not just understanding, knowing how to translate that understanding into a document that your donor can easily read and understand. And also understanding the donor cycle of funding, the donor cycle, what the donor requires. Be aware of the strategic document of the donor, the funding cycle, the funding areas, and also join strategic groups or alliances that you can easily access funds. As Ms. Ifeanyiwa said, and the right said, there is always funding available at every given time. I think Isaiah said that as well. There's always funding available at every given time, but you need to know the when, the how, and what the code for that fund is. Once you're able to hack it, you're more than likely going to be able to access that fund. So thank you so much for joining us today, Isaiah. I really appreciate you staying with me all the way till 12:09.
Thank you. Thank you for
everybody's busy. I see our two panelists had to leave, and I'm very grateful that they were able to stay with us up until 12 o'clock today. So if you have any additional questions, please send an email to info@scaf.org.ng. We have one more webinar on Friday that talks on my sickle story, building an empire. If you have sickle cell and you want to know how to build an empire, join us on Friday, 11 a.m. If you want to rewatch this session, you can check our Instagram page, and you can also check our Facebook page. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I know that Twitter has been banned in Nigeria for now, but follow us anyways. And when we're all back in the system, we can communicate there as well. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a lovely day, everyone. Bye, Isaiah.
Bye. Have a wonderful day.
Yes.